Hey guys, it's Brian from Mixus Metalworks and welcome back to the shop. So hey, we're going to continue on my project here. I'm calling this Pieces of 8 because it'll have at least 8 different manufacturers, car manufacturers in it. Just as a recap, right now we've got a custom frame, but this is Corvette C7 suspension. The Alfa Romeo motor will be in the back. New contender, we got a new transmission. It's actually out of an Opel. Why? I'll gotta get into that once actually I get to the point of actually installing that. But there was a very, very good reason why I went with that. So really gonna have to start solving some problems, some really major problems. So now that we've got the actual roll cage, it's not 100% done, but it's about 90+% done. I've got the seats actually installed, and that's led to the first challenge really, which is the steering. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So let me get the body actually off, and we'll kind of cover what the problem is with the steering. So with the body off, we're able to climb in here easily. You can see the seats are fully installed now. Remember I was talking about the gap here? This is going to be the problem why we have to have the transmission. It's got to be sequential. There's no spot for a shifter in here at all. And the other problem, even though I've stretched the car out, now you can see when I put my feet out, that right there is the actual point, the pickup point for the steering. So that ain't going to work. What I'm gonna do, actually let me show you what I'm gonna do. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna take this part right here. This is actually a U-steer column. It's specifically designed for a Ford, like a 28 to 32 Ford. And I'm gonna use this center section for my steering, because obviously that's in the way. I already planned on running electronic power steering anyway, so having a power steering pump down here is fine, don't need it. All I gotta do is, it's obviously too short. And I don't want to put extensions on here. I actually want to basically mimic the rack that's in there. Because if I put extensions on here, that's going to actually change the point, the pickup point there, and that could cause bump steer. So don't want any bump steer. I already know I got an Ackerman problem because of the wheelbase versus where it was originally kind of set up for the Ackerman angle. That I could probably fix. Having bump steer on top of it really wasn't a good idea. So we're going to take this section here. We're going to mount it. Mount it in the center here, like so. And once that's actually mounted in the center, we'll actually obviously get our feet room back because this is going straight up. Well, you say, well, if it's going straight up, how the heck are you going to connect the steering box to it, or the steering wheel to it? That is going to be achieved with this guy right here, big billet piece of metal. So when I crank the wheel, very smooth, you can see it's turning the opposite. So this is a 90-degree swivel. So that is going to live up here and point right to the steering wheel. So this has to go here, that goes there, and life is good. So what I got to do though is harvest some parts off of the actual rack that's in there right now. The actual rack itself, the actual bar, and part of the housing will be reused. So let me go ahead and pull that out and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here's the rack, minus the actual tie rod ends. I've already taken those off, obviously. So what is the goal here? Here's the rod. This is the rod I want to use to actually extend the U-steer box, which you just saw. So this is going to actually be threaded and go on like that. There's actually this tube here. It's a little hard to see, but this is actually a separate piece. So this is part of it, and that's part of it. So I want to salvage these tubes. These are the mounting points here. And so I'll basically cut this down to whatever length I need. I'm going to cut this down to whatever length I need. But first thing we got to get is this whole mechanism off here so we can actually get the rod out. So let's go over to the bench and kind of work through that process. All right, there you have it. So I kind of successfully hacked up the one rack. I've actually hacked up 2 racks because I had 2 racks and I actually need 2 racks or parts for 2 racks. So Here's the actual rack itself. This is where the pinion goes, and this makes the bar go back and forth. So this is the length that I need to mimic. Just remember that. The original unit comprised of this and this tube here. And this tube is the part I actually need to go on to our new rack setup. Now our new rack setup obviously didn't line up perfectly with these. That's a spacer I made. I made a spacer for that side too. So those two will go on there. I'm actually going to weld this guy onto here. This side's kind of pressed, and I'll weld the tube onto the actual bracket here once it's all said and done. But what I don't know just yet is what's the proper length. This needs to go in the center, and ultimately it needs to be this long. I've gone ahead and from the second rack, I've gone ahead and harvested the actual rack itself and I went ahead and just kind of lopped off the gear part of it because I don't need that. I also removed, this here is actually the oil seal for the power steering part, so I don't need that either. So I went ahead and removed it off this guy. So this is kind of side one. Ultimately, I'm gonna have to cut this side up just like this and get this to side two, but side one is all I need for right now. So what I'm gonna do is put this in the car, right in the dead center, figure out the complete length of this. I just need to measure it. And then I need to basically cut this to the correct length, and I'm gonna have to drill and tap it. One side's actually just threaded, one side's actually drilled and tapped. So I gotta do that and get this down to the proper length. I don't know the exact length just yet, but just by eyeballing it, it's probably about, I gotta probably take about 3 or 4 inches off of this to get this to be the correct overall length. So let's go ahead and start that now. Let's go ahead and get this mocked up and cut this and thread it and see if I can't get at least one side of the steering setup, so I can go ahead and obviously once one's done, then we can do two. So let's get going. Well, I didn't decide to actually time-lapse the process of making the said rack. Let me explain why a little bit. It took a lot longer than I anticipated. Here is one of the original actual units itself. This one, a little hard to see on camera, it's got score marks because basically the boot had been wore out, and that's what you get when you buy cheap stuff off eBay. Sometimes it's not so good. But that actually did make me an extra little part here, so it was less stress measuring. Probably can tell. So this rack now is the exact same as the original GM rack, even though the pinion gear, this part here, the gear part, has been moved to the center. As you can see, I had to do some remanufacturing on the cradle, and the reason for that was this pickup point. This is the original housing. Again, I got 2 of them, one here and one there, off of the Corvette rack. Those bolts are actually a lot farther over than they are on this part. So you can kind of see on the camera here, I ended up welding that up and moving this over so it's actually in a new pickup point. This I just kind of reinforced a little bit. It moved just minor, just a teeny bit. The big deal still though is this rack will actually be mounted. You can see the bolt hole, maybe you can't see bolt holes. There's bolt holes here. And there'll be a plate that's attached to the actual frame. So the real rigidity is not this cradle anyway. So it was in the factory setup. The factory setup had a hard mount. You can see there's no rubber bushing there. I've actually got rubber bushings now on both ends because I'm using these guys. So what I wanted to do or decided to do then is go ahead and also mount this, hard mount this to the actual chassis and kind of let those float a little bit. But what I've got going on here is actually an indicator to make sure that this was perfectly centered. I've got the same amount of distance from this center bolt here to there, and the same there to there, or there to there. So that knows for sure now that when I turn this, I've got the exact same travel side to side. I also have the same amount of travel as it was from the factory setup, so that's pretty exciting. Now, realistically, we've got to take this cradle, take the cradle that's in the car, take that out, put this cradle in, and actually see, did I fix my problem? Remember, the problem was this sat like this at this angle, and you know, my foot was getting real close. There was no way to put a shaft here. So now we got this shaft here. Oh, yeah, and we also have this piece right here. So that's gonna go something like this. And when you turn this little thing here, Kind of hard to tell, but there, see, it's turning the shaft. So that's actually how the steering is going to work. It's going to be basically straight to the steering, to the actual steering wheel itself. Comes in, goes straight down. So now we've got plenty of leg clearance, hopefully. So let's go ahead and get this put back in the car and see what we've got. All right, so as you can see, I've got the actual rack installed down there. Also I've got plenty of feet room now. Can't touch anything. Got to squeeze way down to actually be able to hit anything, which is awesome. Obviously I went ahead and just kind of tacked the rack in place to kind of start the next part of the process, which is connecting my Maserati rack to my Toyota Yaris power steering unit to the rack that I built, the Chevy Ford rack. So the project Pieces of 8 is coming along quite nicely as far as its title goes. So I think actually this is probably a pretty good stopping point for this video. We did get the rack installed, so in the next video we'll talk more about getting the steering going and continuing in on the front part. We actually have to get, hold on, I'll show you. We gotta get this part in. So we also have to install the heating and air conditioning system. This came out of Miata, and that's going to live somewhere. Gonna make some brackets, obviously. It's going to live somewhere around there. This is the air conditioning part. The heating core is down here. This is a distribution panel. The fan is actually not part of this unit. It's got to be installed too. So the fan is going to be a little challenging because, frankly, we are running out of room. So I'll need to go ahead and kind of figure out how to get the steering routed. It's pretty straightforward. It just kind of goes a little bit of an angle, hopefully somewhere right around here once we get all that to kind of line up. But again, we'll do that in the next video. So this is a good stopping point. So for me, Dead Bob, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.